Okay. 5-0.
Yeah.
I understood like 15. No. 15, I can't. Okay, good morning, everyone. Everybody ready for the last day? Okay, so I am here, and it's quite funny because we were having breakfast this morning, and we just realized that IFBs, it's instruments, frameworks, and bodies, and not institutions, frameworks, and bodies. So just, as a legal scholar, if I can say that, just remember that instruments is way different than institutions. So I have a real and relevant panel here and panelists. I think Gabi, Dani, and Amber, are you online? Yes? No?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay, it's a meme of me. Oh, good morning, everyone. Okay, I have the pleasure to have this moment together with all of you, especially because the BBNJ is bringing to us an opportunity to bring everybody together and work together as partners under this inclusivity of IFBs, and who will frame to us what we can envision in the context of BBNJ. It's our former Dualos director, so it's kind of an authority among us. Gabi, can you start with us? Okay, just this is like my computer doesn't help me. Okay. So, Gabi, can you start like a kind of a framing for us what lessons have been learned about how mutual supportiveness works amongst IFBs, and wonder what conditions has it succeed, or what will be the challenges? Please.
Bom dia. Julia, fellow panelists, and distinguished participants. And at the outset, I wish to thank the organizers for inviting me to this very successful symposium. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Murray. And I'm very sorry that I can't be there in person. So at the outset, let me emphasize that IFBs, legal frameworks, legal instruments and frameworks and relevant global, regional, sub-regional, sectoral bodies, IFBs, mutually support each other on a regular basis on a range of issues. The success of such endeavors depends mainly on the primary actors, namely states, supported by secretariats. So turning first to states, mutual supportiveness among members of IFBs is dependent on a number of conditions. For example, how member states cooperate with each other, and the geopolitical environment is an important consideration in that regard. A sizable number of identical members in the relevant IFBs is also very important. Inclusiveness and equity promoting strategies such as availability of support to developing states to participate in relevant IFBs as a member or observer is critical. For example, the participation of developing states in the review conference and in the informal consultations of states parties to the UN Fish Stocks Agreement has been constrained by limited funds in the assistance fund under the Part 7 of the agreement. Another required condition is an integrated or coordinated ocean policy at the national level, supported by key national ministries or agencies. Engagement with and buy-in from the private sector, indigenous peoples and local communities, scientists and civil society, as well as other stakeholders, is also crucial. A shared vision or goal, and we just heard Margaret say common areas of common ground among the IFBs based on mutual respect for the mandate and competence of each IFB, the identification of potential linkages and areas for collaboration, and regular reviews of lessons learned are also important prerequisites. Support for rules and practices in IFB that ensure transparency, accessibility, in particular in relation to participation in meetings of IFBs and by IFBs, and the aforementioned other stakeholders, as well as communication and regular sharing of information and consultations at an early stage with relevant IFBs on issues of joint interest or concern are further essential steps in building trust and productive working relationships. Such rules and practices are also vital for successful mutual supportiveness among secretariats of IFBs, which are regularly relied upon to assist states in strengthening cooperation and coordination with IFBs. Other conditions include the identification of possible areas for synergy and further collaboration, joint awareness raising and capacity building activities, and sharing of lessons learned. For example, several secretariats of IFBs are assisting their members in the consideration of the relationship of the relevant IFB with the BBNJ agreement. These kinds of analysis by relevant IFBs is encouraged as they can assist states in identifying mutual benefits, synergies, areas requiring coherence, and gaps. Cooperation and coordination among the secretariats of IFBs has taken place directly, often formalized through memoranda of understanding or agreements. There are many examples, including the collective arrangement between the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Commission and OSPAR. Cooperation and coordination has also taken place through interagency mechanisms, such as UN Oceans, which current membership includes 32 UN system entities and the International Seabed Authority. Important outputs include the 2024 Statement of Commitment by UN Oceans in relation to the BBNJ agreement, including with respect to information sharing and identification of possible areas for collaboration and synergy. There are also other secretariat cooperative mechanisms that have exchanged views on the implications of the BBNJ agreement for their work, and these include the Regional Fishery Body Secretariats Network, and the global meetings of the regional seas and conventions and action plans, as well as multi-stakeholder initiatives such as the Sustainable Ocean Initiative. In my experience, mutual supportiveness among IFBs has worked best when there was a clear and defined objective that IFBs could contribute to on an equal footing. Meetings that were convened to talk about cooperation and coordination in general tended to be rather unproductive. One last point that I wish to highlight is that in many cases, there are no dedicated financial resources in the budgets of IFBs for cooperation and coordination functions. This is a major constraint and needs to be addressed if secretariats are expected to effectively perform these functions and assist states. Thank you for your attention. Obrigada.
Thank you, Gabi. And we miss you, but it's a rainy Rio moment, so okay. So don't be jealous. Well, it's really interesting that she can kind of setting the scene for us. Like her experience can bring a lot of food for thought and a lot of to discuss among us. And I just cut like the beautiful words to Maury and Andre because you gave me like 10 minutes less. Okay, but thank you. Okay, so let's move on in our diverse panel with Brittany from Pew, like representing like the civil society. And you work directly with RFMOs, so the kind of the elephant in the room during BBNJ process somehow. So in your vision, where are the greatest institutional readiness gaps? Please, Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to the organizers, and thanks to everyone for being here. It's been a really exciting week so far, lots of great conversations. I'm relatively new to the BBNJ space, so it's been a real learning opportunity. So yeah, to build on the remarks from Gabi, which were very helpful and I think align really nicely here, The BBNJ RFMO interface is really a two-way exchange. And this is a new paradigm. I mean, both regimes are really trying to learn how the other operates, trying to figure out how things work, what the expectations are, what are the modes of collaboration. And, you know, this is really going to take some intentionality. It's not just going to happen organically, and it's not just going to happen in kind of talking about broad strokes on coordination and collaboration. So with that, there's also multiple opportunities across the BBNJ agreement. All of the elements have entry points for this type of cooperation and coordination. But I think it's also important to acknowledge that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. The RFMOs have their mandates. They also have increasing expectations, not just from BBNJ, but across the ocean space. And so it's really going to be a careful balance and a careful conversation that has to take place. That being said, I do think that there are I'll give three kind of immediate opportunities or very near-term opportunities that can really start to put into place some of these institutional readiness things to overcome some of the challenges that we've seen so far with what cooperation looks like. So the first, and maybe this is going to be quite obvious, but it's a point that Nicola raised in one of the side events yesterday, is that many RFMOs, while the commissions have talked about BBNJ broadly, they don't actually have a dedicated space for raising BBNJ issues and for getting updates on what's happening as the BBNJ agreement evolves. And so a very kind of low-hanging fruit, if you will, is to establish that space. That can look like a standing agenda item. So far, we've got about 5 RFMOs that have an agenda item where BBNJ is explicitly discussed, but there's 22, I think, RFMOs. So there's a lot more that can take this action and really kind of set up a forum where updates can be had, situational awareness can be made, all of those types of things, which are really important because we are in this kind of learning and education moment in the coordination process. I think some RFMOs, so I think we've got 2 so far, have actually taken it a step further and actually established specific measures. And what these measures have done, they're different, but they have really established a clear mandate for the RFMO secretariats to be able to engage in the BBNJ process. That doesn't just happen on its own. It has to be a decision that is made by the members for the secretariats to be able to engage. And that helps to address the point that Gabby was just making about having support to be able to participate in BBNJ meetings. It also gives them the expectation of responding to various requests from the BBNJ regime to RFMOs, things like that. So, again, very kind of seemingly obvious points of engagement, but it's a very, it's not happening yet, and it's something that's going to be really important because if those communication lines aren't open, then the coordination can't happen effectively. And then the final point that I'll make, and this is going to be a longer term exercise, but it's really kind of establishing some initial mandates for evaluating how RFMO tools can inform the BBNJ process. RFMOs do a lot of work. They have a lot of science capabilities. They collect a lot of data. They have a lot of expertise across spatial management. And so how to effectively kind of understand what those tools and capabilities are across regimes, how to have their review processes, not just kind of look backwards at how things have gone, but also have a forward-looking component to account for the evolution of the BBNJ regime. All of those types of things are really important. And again, it's about kind of establishing those mechanisms to have kind of clear communication and a clear feedback loop between BBNJ and RFMOs. The last point that I'll make, RFMOs and IFBs in general, it's really important to remember, they are not abstract institutions. They are made up of members, and many of those members are also party to the BBNJ agreement. And those parties have an obligation under the BBNJ agreement to actually promote coherence in the multilateral regimes that they are party to. And it's this active role that is going to be really imperative for this coordination and cooperation to take place. The members and the parties really have to kind of see this as important. And it's not going to be easy. This has been the challenge in multilateralism forever, is trying to break down institutional silos, trying to have, experts across disciplines be able to communicate with each other. But, BBNJ is another opportunity for us to really kind of test the mechanisms for making that happen. So, thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. Well, we have been doing this the last couple of weeks after Amber suggested us our call, and Brittany suggested us to reflect a little bit about which words can be, when we think about IFBs and this coherence and coordination that we should put in place, what would be the words that can help us to reflect on that? So I want to thank Brittany for this brilliant idea, and Emilia, where are you? She's there, and she helped us with the Matimeter. So if you can project the QR code, and if you here in person and people who is online can share with us which words come to your mind when you think about IFBs and this coherence, coordination, and partnership that we should establish to make the BBNJ not only a milestone for multilateralism, but also for implementation, environmental agreement implementation. So please share your ideas with us. And because when we envision that, it would be like a really beautiful cloud behind us. So let's move on because we don't have too much time, I know. And based on what Brittany just said, Nicola, do you have some reflections on how can IFBs promote cooperation, especially with your expertise as a legal, oh my gosh, from FAO, legal expert, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Well, I'll try and pick up from where Brittany left off. She made some very valid points. Just to clarify, I'm here representing one of those RFMOs established in the framework called the FAO. It's a total of 6 of them, to the best of my counting. It could become 5 by the end of the year because APFIC, which is the first RFMO established by the FAO back in 1946, will soon have to decide as to whether or not the work in the Commission is going to be continued or discontinued. So they could become 5. But, GSCM is pretty active. I don't think we're going to have, an opportunity to be discontinued anytime soon. So as a representative of one of these RFMOs in the framework of the FAO, I think, we need to act with common sense. I really like some of the comments I've been hearing over the last 2 days. Brittany mentioned that one more time. We, as Secretariat, we do have a responsibility to provide a forum whereby we facilitate the liaison between the representatives of our member states. I'm not speaking of the member states. We know that our FMOs, we have people coming from the Fisheries Department. And my responsibility when these people come to me and they ask me, what do you think of Part 3? This could be a threat for us. The Ministry of Environment is taking over. I've been hearing this kind of stuff for decades. And, my role as Secretariat is not, wait, don't worry about that. I'll take care of it. We're going to go to New York. We're going to tell them, we're never going to be cooperating. And I have to say, there have been interventions at the PRACOM along those lines. Those of us who were there in New York in August, I will mention, as we say in Italy, I will mention the scene. I will not tell you who the sinner is, okay? But I do recall an intervention from one IFB representative. I almost fell from my chair. This person said, after everybody, just speaking up their minds on a specific agenda item, the very beginning of the intervention was, I can tell you that the member states of my organization will not accept that. I mean, these are the members. It's the same countries. I mean, I don't know of two different words where you have 200 countries here in this room and then 200 countries. And I was like, you know, I didn't hear anything along those lines from any of these countries. How can you possibly say something like that? So it's about common sense. I mean, at this early stage, we should, as Secretariat, facilitate this coordination by, for instance, there is a budget, you know, budget cuts are everywhere, representing our representatives to fora where BBNJ matters are discussed and reporting back to them. It's their decision, it's not my decision, and I'm not supposed to steer it in any way. This is how you promote cooperation and say, okay, in New York, as far as we go, we have addressed this topic, and this topic. Just facilitate, you know, the possibility for them to take a position and present what the opportunities will be arising. For instance, the Jeff, we are going to be hearing a line from Andrew Hume very soon in the next panel, I think, provide, you know, opportunities, financial opportunities for countries to team up. And they want to see this blending, this, you know, sort of cooperation and integration between the different ministries involved by the BBNJ agreement. So far, our experience is that this has been extremely constructive. You know, we have tried to use the little budget that we have to attend regional workshops by the laws. We have been here from the very beginning, the BBNJ Symposium. You need to come and listen. Just switch off your brain, you listen, take notes, and report back to your countries. Then it's an internal matter for them to decide. But again, Brittany said it. We already have over 60, you know, countries members of the BBNJ agreement. Before we know it, we're going to see quasi-universal participation, like in the case of the UNCLOS. I would invite you, the legal people in this room in particular, if you look at the pace of entry into force of major ocean governance treaties and agreements from the 80s, including the UNCLOS, this one is by far the fastest one. I was having a conversation back in the day with Charlotte. Remember, I said, hey, what's your take? What's your guess? How many years is it going to take before it will enter into force? She was extremely optimistic, and I was like, no, forget about it. I mean, not before 2030. And I used, you know, just a calculated average. The FAO, which I indirectly represent, has been, you know, emphasizing that the Post Measures Agreement enter into force only 5 years after its own adoption. This is much faster than that. So what I'm saying is, before we know it, I think by 2030, over 100 countries are going to be members of the BBNJ agreement. So I wonder which RFMO or IFB can legitimately say, you know, my countries are not members of this agreement and they oppose it. I don't see this scenario happening. So let's try and be, you know, positive and constructive. Let's do the job that the Secretary is supposed to do. Lisa, report, understand, contribute with our knowledge as far as we go. You remember we had an informal exchange of views. For instance, MGRs is, you know, part 2 of the agreement. As far as I see the work of the RFMOs, we are not concerned by that. So I could easily go to my country's representative of my country and say, you know, MGRs is our future. Let's find a position. We need to fight. We need to make sure that, you know, our experience in eDNA or whatever is going to be taken into account. That would not be constructive. It's not about, you know, biting this jurisdictional apple. You know, let's focus for the time being as far as we go on part 3 of the agreement. I think we have a lot to contribute when it comes to the setting up of ABNTs, including, you know, in the ICs. And find, you know, commonalities, okay? Then if these commonalities do not exist and there is some resistance from the member states, it's up to them to discuss it internally and in the relevant fora, including the COP, which will hopefully by the end of the year kick off. So that's, you know, my 2 cents that I would like to share. And then thank you very much for your patience. And sorry if I'm passionate every now and then on these topics, but, you know, I just tell you what I see and I'm like, hey, well, I don't get it, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was about to say, can we just, you know, like close the session and stay here? It's okay for you? I have so many thoughts to share. And yes, I definitely agree. And but I think it's quite difficult sometimes to coordinate in the countries, like, you know, among all the, you know, for example, here in Brazil, I think it's like 26 ministries that we should coordinate, you know, for ocean governance. So it's quite challenging, but we have a lot of people, and I can see some fisheries people and MGRs and everything. So maybe we can rethink how to make it. And I don't want to, put you in a spotlight, but I already did. Sorry for that. Let's move on. And was a little bit tricky. Mariana Caldera is here. She's like working with a stakeholder engagement, and we have a so diverse group here, and so challenging because like you gave me only difficult things to do because RFMO, FAO, and now I have CBD coming and shipping. Okay, so Sahan, from your background, your expertise in shipping, especially like global shipping governance, industry, actors, participation. What practical lessons does this offer to the BBNJ as the beginnings of this personalization of the agreement? And I know that is also kind of a topic that we have been avoiding somehow. But please, I think you will give us some ideas how to proceed.
Yeah, thanks, Julia, and good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are. Let me first thank the organizers inviting for the event. And build upon of what Brittany and Nicolas said, I agree wholeheartedly the challenges. If I started talking about that, then I'll be repeating myself. So let's keep it as a common challenges across the IFBs, right? And on these particular issues, I think yes, there are challenges. Yes, it may not be a move organically. There will be a push and a pull also to get them onto the table. But it doesn't say that there are no lessons to be learned, especially on IFBs are there and doing so much of the work and their instrumentation arrangements, etc. One of those things is, I think, when it comes to shipping, is you can say is this equitable representation in rulemaking. So as you mentioned about the how the governance process, how the involvement of the actors. When I say actors, it's not just the industry actors, right? And everybody has a seat at the table. You have the ship owners, you have the other financiers, then go on with the different stakeholders like environmental groups and academia. They all can make and contribute to the rulemaking. So that's, I think, quite a matured process. And in that process, I think what I can explain is that it's going into sort of like 3-tier. So the first one is that you have this negotiation at the IMO level, because how it works is that the IMO developed this mandatory and non-mandatory instrument through number of committees and subcommittees, focusing on the safety of ship, environment protection, and procedure for legal disputes. So the tier 1 is, if I may say, is at the IMO. So everybody comes in and then they identify the objectives, develop structure, drafting guidelines, and develop work plan for how that instrument needs to be put forward. That you have the member states primarily taking place, and then the other stakeholders, NGOs, and everybody who's interested in put forward the technical papers and other legal procedures. So while that was going on, I think the second tier comes in, which is the private-public partnership. So you have donors, you have, again, the institutional help from the Secretary General office, and then you have the actors. They get together and work towards certain elements of that instrument outside, I would say outside, but within a different process, because now you have the partnership of the public organization in there, spending money and time developing, again, legal, scientific, and other know-how to help the instrument. And that will go to those subcommittees and then be taken into process for the development of the instrument. And the third one is the interesting one, that is by the actors themselves. For example, industry. They get together and they work on some very specific topics. It could be very technical, it could be very legal, it could be very scientific. And they develop their own procedures, and that would come out as industry procedures, or sometimes it's go into a way being international standard. And those standards then sometimes incorporate by reference in those instruments. So this is a very matured process. I think it's one of the lessons perhaps can be learned. What does this provide is not just a legal instrument that is good or sound on paper, but something that can be worked at the ground level, because everybody chipped in to make it happen. And a few other examples I would say is that there's a discussion about the multi-jurisdictional challenge. So shipping is not new to multi-jurisdictional challenge. In a single voyage, in a day, we will be passing through a number of different jurisdictions. Needless to say that BBNJ make the whole thing more complicated, but there is a process. And that process is not for the ship, but also all the other support services, starting from if you order a cargo, starting from that financing, banking, and then going through with the chartering, and all the way up to that cargo comes back to you, the whole lot of stakeholders and the supply chain going through with that multi-jurisdictional approach. So there may be a lesson to learn from there. And I think maybe the other few things we can know, these are the institutional lessons that we can learn. But there are also like some other things we can learn from the existing with the shipping. For example, if you take about the development of the net zero framework, if you think about the ambition level to get an entire industry through one task, and I have to be careful here, I'm not talking about the ambition level of the climate targets. Everybody have a different perspective of it. But IMO is a very technical UN agency. But they went above and beyond their comfort level, getting the financing in and bringing the political will, and also mobilizing all the stakeholders. I can't even start naming them, there are so many. Not just directly involving in the net zero framework, but also very remotely involving in the shipping. For example, development of fuel standard. So we just use fuel. That's not our job. But to go into that level of identifying the life cycle carbon assessment of the ship, developing that. So that's a lesson that if there is something need to be done and it needs to be done right, you have to go beyond your comfort zone. And maybe the last point I would say is that not afraid to ask for help, know what you don't know. So when we were involving in since this is very much of a scientific community in here, when we develop in the non-mandatory instruments for prevention of alien invasive species from transfer of ships and ballast water, 2004, there's a lot of scientific community came in to help the process. But that wasn't enough because there's no expertise on, for example, ecotoxicology in that room. There's no expertise on the chemical processes. So we went back to the GESAM. So we had the previous GESAM chairman yesterday here. And to date, the mandatory instrument require approval of a ballast water management system of active substances through that GESAM G9 process. And very recently, the discussion that started with the International Atomic Agency and the nuclear coordinating unit with the nuclear regulator for nuclear-powered ships, that's not the expertise that they have in-house. They have to go out and ask for the help. Probably that is a good example, thought process of STBs. We are talking about the expertise, right? Marine technology is different to ship technology. And the ship operation is very much different to ship technology. I think there'll be a whole lot of expertise that probably would be needed going forward for BBNJ to have a sound and proper implementation. So there are lessons to be learned. I'm not saying that IFB and the process is perfect. It's far from perfect. But you can make those lessons and you can take that one forward. And that's what I think probably we need to be focusing on.
Thank you, Sahan. I forgot to mention you're representing Lloyd's Register here. I'm so sorry to not mention that. Well, so we have a very good example that he just gave to us. We can take notes through the idea of Brittany and fulfill the Nicola requirement and come back home with a lot of ideas to share and to coordinate better. Can we see Amber and Danny in the on screen? Hey, good morning. Both of them can stay a little bit with us. I think they are feeling a little bit alone. So, moving a little bit from shipping and RFMO's approach, Amber, I think most of us knows your expertise on CBD and Nagoya Protocol. And we know that the CBD took 8 years to operationalize the benefit sharing, as you already mentioned in our conversation. So this operationalization for digital sequence information. So what can you share with us about this long process that Nicola already mentioned, that BBNJ is like even faster? Please.
Yeah, no, thanks for the great question, Julia. And I'm really sorry that I can't be there. My visa came in yesterday. I would have loved to have been there in person with everyone. So the question is basically the mutual supportiveness or the interactions between the Convention on Biological Diversity and the BBNJ agreement. What have we learned in CBD? What mutual supportiveness might we need to think about? And I wanted to go back to Ambassador Janine's opening words. She noted that the BBNJ agreement was the first treaty to actually regulate digital sequence information, or DSI for short. And that is absolutely legally true, but of course we can't forget that 3 months beforehand at COP15 in Montreal, as part of the package deal for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, there was an agreement by the Convention on Biological Diversity's parties to establish a multilateral benefit sharing agreement or mechanism for digital sequence information. And I think that actually, I think it's fair to say that agreement at CBD 3 months before the final IGC created a huge amount of momentum to be able to find a safe landing zone on DSI. And I think that before we can talk about COP16 and what happened then and how that could relate to the COP1 decisions for DSI, I wanted to go back and do kind of a crazy metaphor. And I'm nervous because this is rather informal, but sometimes it can be helpful to kind of speak from your personal experiences. So my son's birthday is on Saturday, and I am baking him a cake. His favorite cake is Black Magic. And it's a chocolate cake with vanilla icing. And if you think about baking a cake, you need ingredients. So you might walk into a store, a grocery store, or a store that only sells baking ingredients. And there's like 100 different ingredients on the shelves: milk, flour, vanilla, sugar, oils, spices, and so on. And then you gather your ingredients, and then you go to the cash register and you say, okay, I need to pay. And then the cash register person, the cashier, says, okay, you have 2 different options. And I'm oversimplifying the policy options we discussed in CBD. One option is you tell me, after you bake the cake, which ingredients you use in which cakes, what proportions of which ingredients were used, and how much value did they add to your final product. And then you go to each of the suppliers that gave me these supplies, and then you pay them these individual subsets for each of the ingredients you used in your cake. Or, she says, you can pay me a flat fee for access to all the ingredients that you want here, and you can use them in any proportion that you like, and you don't have to work with the suppliers directly. You can just pay me here, one stop. You can imagine pretty easily that that is an appealing option, that second option. And because DSI product-based development is a lot like baking a cake, I mean, it's a little bit more fancy science and biotechnology, but it's basically mixing things together. you can imagine that that second option is really important, because how do you make value judgments about whether the important ingredient is the flour, or is it the sugar, or is it the eggs, or is it actually the spice? So if we think about my son's chocolate cake, actually one of the reasons that it's a cool cake, it's a little bit strong in its chocolate flavor, is because a cup of coffee is added into it. So coffee is our magic special spice. And if you think then forwards between COP15 and COP16, those 2 years, what were CBD parties talking about? They were thinking about, how do we account for the complexity of biotech development, about all of the different ingredients and the different proportions and the different stuff that goes into a DSI cake. And they basically came up with this simple formula, which is you pay 1% of profits, or 0.1% of your revenues, into a new global fund named beautifully after Cali, the host city of COP16, the Cali Fund. And this really was thought to address many of industry's concerns that they would not need to do a complex bureaucratic tracking and tracing process. Now, if we go back to that cake store, and now I'm bringing it back to this IFB discussion, and we look at the BBNJ DSI provisions, and we have 100 ingredients in our cake store. And one of those ingredients is from BBNJ, and 99 are from CBD. And you might say, okay, that's not fair. There should be many more BBNJ. But actually, the public database is 1% of the DSI comes from areas beyond national jurisdiction, and the other 99% comes from other jurisdictions. So if you imagine that's my special ingredient, I need my coffee for my black magic cake. And the cashier says, no, wait a minute, but that ingredient is different. You have to do it differently. You need to do these kinds of tracking and tracing activities, and then you need to enter into these kinds of royalty payments, or whatever might be discussed in the future. If I'm a TV mom and I'm very motivated, I might go through that process, and it might be very important to me to have the coffee. But I'm a lazy mom, I'm a working mom. And so I'm basically like, no coffee, it's a chocolate cake, it'll be fine, he'll like it, it's fine. And I move on. I avoid the coffee because I just think it's not actually worth it. For me, it's still a good enough cake. Or I try to find coffee from a CBD jurisdiction so that I'm in the same shop. And Julia, this is where I want to bring it back to this concept of mutual supportiveness in the dialogue between science and policy. One of my biggest wishes, as I look at this from a scientific perspective, is to bring the BBNJ discussions around monetary benefit sharing to learn from the CBD lessons, and to create a system for monetary benefit sharing that is mutually supportive, where BBNJ DSI is not less attractive than the rest of the stuff, where it is equal no matter what choice you make, no matter which DSI you use to develop your product, you're in the same system. And I think that's a lot of complex questions. Like you said, it was 8 years to develop the CBD mechanism, but I do think that now is a beautiful time to start the conversation, to think about these mutually supportive mechanisms and avoid unintended consequences. Thanks, over.
And I don't know you, but like for me, the best part of this panel is like looking at them and seeing how they approach the different approach that they have been doing here. So, Denny, are you with us?
Yeah, hi, Julia.
Hey, good morning. It's cold. It's raining, so
it's comforting to me to know that it's raining in Rio. It's raining in Scotland too, and it's cold.
Okay, I'm just breaking the ice, because we will come back from for legal implications on CBD lessons learned. So thinking about what Amber just said, what you can add using your expertise as a legal scholar, please.
Thank you so much, Julia. And first of all, thank you so much to the organizers, to INPO, Andre, and Mara, and Murray, and everybody for the invitation to speak here today. And yes, my sincere apologies, I cannot be there with you in person. So yeah, so building on what has been said in this marvelous panel that I'm very honored to be part of, I wanted to remind everybody that IFBs is not just the sectoral bodies, and I think Amber did a fantastic job in explaining so well with the metaphor of the birthday cake that MEAs, multilateral environmental agreements, are also IFBs, and we need to take them into consideration when implementing the BBNJ agreement, and biodiversity-related agreements play a key role in the implementation of the BBNJ agreement. So various CBD COP decisions on marine biodiversity and other topics like protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures, biodiversity and climate change, and others contribute to the implementation of the BBNJ agreement. And I want to give an example. For example, with respect to ABMTs, area-based management tools, including MPAs, there is extensive scientific guidance on ecologically representative MPA network design by the CBD, although further work tailored to deep sea ecosystems could be developed, and we have been discussing that already under the CBD to better assist the work of the STB and BBNJ in preparing guidance in this regard. Of great importance also is the EPSA process, ecologically or biologically significant marine areas process under the CBD, which provides a fundamental tool for the BBNJ agreement and its parties to build upon in proposing ABMTs and in developing EIAs. There has been 338 EBSAs described globally to date. 42 of those are transboundary, occurring within and beyond national jurisdiction, and 38 occur solely in ABNJ. And the EPSA process is a robust scientific process that goes through the CBD COP in the end, and the end product is supported by 196 parties. So what Nicola was talking about, quasi-universality of treaties, which is very important, and CBD has that, 196 parties. Some of the ABNJ EPSAs can feed into the development of proposals of BBNJ parties, since the ABNJ agreement does not have a process to identify areas important for biodiversity that would meet the Annex 1 criteria. And in fact, all of the 7 EPSA criteria are incorporated into the BBNJ Annex 1 indicative criteria list. I'm not proposing here that all ABNJ EBSAs or that the entire EBSA polygons would necessarily qualify as a potential ABMT under the BBNJ agreement. But what I'm suggesting is that proposals by parties could benefit enormously from the EBSA description and could build and supplement and be supplemented, in terms of that rich source of information in light of further studies, and also to respond to the requirements of Article 19, Paragraph 4 of the agreement on what the proposals should contain for ABMTs. EBSAs can also contribute to EIAs and environmental impact assessments and strategic environmental assessments. As noted repeatedly by CBD COP decisions, EBSAs can provide very important information for those processes. Under the BBNJ agreement in Article 30, Paragraph 2 on thresholds and factors for EIAs, parties shall consider, among other things, the characteristics and ecosystem of location, including areas of particular ecological or biological significance or vulnerability, and the EBSA information can be useful resource in this regard. Furthermore, the CBD COP has developed biodiversity-inclusive EIA and SAA guidelines in marine areas that could also be taken into account by the STB when developing its own EIA and SAA standards and guidelines for COP consideration. CMS, so the Convention on Migratory Species, CBD, the IWC, and others have also dedicated a lot of attention to underwater noise. Apologies. And CMS has adopted guidance on how to consider underwater noise in EIAs, which can also be very valuable resource to the STB. So just to summarize, MEAs, multilateral environmental agreements, such as the CBD and the CMS, have produced so many important recommendations and guidance over the past decades, and these need to be implemented. They haven't been fully implemented, and if we are to achieve proper marine biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, we should make use of those in developing further guidance under the BBNJ agreement. In times of limited resources and with the UN liquidity crisis upon us, effective implementation can be achieved by looking into mutual supportiveness among IFBs and BBNJ rather than promoting fragmentation. And the BBNJ agreement has the mandate to catalyze that enhanced cooperation needed as part of its own objectives beyond the conservation and sustainable use. International cooperation is highlighted in Article 2 on its objectives. And Article 8, Paragraph 1 on international cooperation also emphasizes this role of BBNJ. And as Gabi said, mutual supportiveness can be better achieved when mutual clear objectives are set. And BBNJ provides that clear path and entry points and objectives in this regard. So in my opinion, building on those tools to strengthen multilateralism, cooperation, and coordination can contribute to the achievement of common goals across regimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dani, for your intervention. Did you see? Article provisions, like legal scholars, we don't talk about cakes. So like take-home messages that we can think about it and reflect on this panel. It's we should build coherence and coordination, as Brittany asked us, and come back home and do the homework, as Nicola proposed it. And we can use the IMO well-established, well-known, and well-done work as an example. And rethink that the marine biodiversity, it's kind of a amber's cake that is not, we cannot split, okay, this is like ABNJ and this is like within national jurisdiction. We should reflect on that. I really thank you all the panelists, especially Gabi. I'm not sure if she's still with us, for framing our session and our discussion. And we open for at least one question. I know that I am 2 minutes late. I know, and you are the best, I know, but like, please, just, okay. So there is like any question from the audience here or at home? Out, okay. Oh my gosh, it's coming something really tricky for you. Just be prepared. Yes? It's you. The lady like a red dress. Dr. Christine Gable, please.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and inspiring panel. It's something that I think quite a lot about, and how we will make cooperation and arrangements to enhance cooperation work in practice under the BBNJ agreement. So I found it really interesting to hear all your different insights. I also found it interesting to see some of the responses that came up through your little survey. I really like that. So thank you for bringing that and audience and engagement into it as well. I found it interesting to see that there was some responses around sharing and funding and opportunity, bridges. When you first posed this, I was thinking that we would see something quite negative come up, but in reality, we're seeing a very positive opportunity to enhance cooperation. I'm particularly interested, as many of you know, in capacity sharing and development. Can I hear some of your thoughts on how this cooperation and arrangements to enhance cooperation can actually support Part 5 of the agreement and make that work mutually beneficial?
Thank you, Christine. I think it's really interesting, but because of you are in a rush right now, what do you think about like just do a quick round among all of you and sharing like 1 or 2 words about how we can make it? Do you think it's possible? Let's start with like Brittany.
Yeah, great question. And obviously we could have had a panel focused on IFBs and each element of the agreement. So I think the capacity building one is a really important one. All IFBs have some form of capacity building, and I think that there's a real opportunity to leverage those existing efforts. I think one of the common things that comes up in the capacity building space is like, oh, we need a needs assessment to understand like what it is that people want. And then there's a lot of fatigue around that. It's like, oh, we're just asked what we need, what's needed, but we don't actually then do the action. And so, yeah, I think there's a real opportunity here to kind of take some of the existing work on capacity building in the IFBs and really help to leverage that to, build capacity around BBNJ and to strengthen some of those mutual needs that exist across these regimes.
Okay, should I say?
20 seconds.
Okay, 20 seconds. 10 seconds for Nicola. 10 seconds.
Okay, just briefly on the contribution by the RFMOs. In 2 months from now, there will be a meeting in New York convened by the General Assembly, by the OLOS, the ICP 19, and that is going to be exactly about the topic of what are the implications of the BBNJ agreement on the RFMOs. The secretaries have been invited to provide contributions, so one of the contributions we are going to be providing is exactly on that point. So stay tuned and just monitor Douala's website for those contributions and try and be in New York in 2 months from now, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, Sahan.
Yes, very quickly, I think when it comes to shipping, we're only talking about the EIA and the BMT process, but I think the capacity building and transfer of marine technology is a very important one because there's an existing process and framework probably we can use that the shipping is using, because when it comes to capacity building, it's not same for every administration. Some have the resources to do that, and those who in need will have a process. It doesn't matter the instrument is different. You can use that existing process and do the capacity building where you're doing it for the same group of government officials and the other people. So use what you have.
Thank you. Can we just share their faces again, like Gabi?
Julia, I'm going to have to stop because we have 2 major panels coming up after coffee and then our closing remarks. So these people need coffee, okay? Yes. So I am going to say the Mentimeter Cloud is great. Thank you, online panelists. If we can see you as we leave the audience, leave the auditorium, that'd be lovely, Fabio. If not, I just have to say thank you very much, Julia. It was a really great panel. Hi. Yeah, thank you. Yay. Brilliant. Thanks, Fabio. So as you leave the auditorium for coffee, can I just please ask that panelists for panel 8, panel 9 and the closing ceremony, we're back here at 11 o'clock. And just a reminder, today's the final day to see the wonderful interactive ocean exhibition. If you can find 5 minutes, go to customer service. They'll give you a ticket and pop in. It's really well worth it. Thank you for your participation online and in person. See you at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. It's okay.